Hi, and welcome to Early Retirement Roadmap, the show where I help you prepare for and thrive in early retirement. So these days, Gen X is supposed to be in our peak earning years. This is when we're supposed to be chasing the bigger salary, the better title, saving every dollar we can, and maybe squeezing another 5 or 10 years out of our careers. But a lot of us seem to be doing the exact opposite. We're stepping back, turning off the work phone, caring less about the next promotion, and thinking seriously about retirement. And some of us, like me, are walking away from work earlier than we were probably expected to. I retired at 55, and I don't think what's happening with Gen X's laziness, I don't think it's some giant midlife crisis either. I think something more interesting is happening. For a lot of us, the value equation has changed. Another dollar doesn't necessarily feel as valuable as another day we actually control. And now that I've been on the retired side of that decision, I understand that shift a lot better than I did while I was still working. So today I want to talk about why I think so many Gen Xers are becoming quietly done with work, because I see 7 reasons why that's happening. And that's what I'm going to go over in this episode. And yes, there is a subgeneration I think this will apply to as well, called Generation Jones. Generation Jones is basically the younger baby boomers born roughly from 1954 to 1965, who came of age in the 1970s and often identify more with Gen X than older boomers. For simplicity's sake in this episode, however, I'm just going to use the term Gen X, but know much of these feelings will also apply if you're in Generation Jones. And if you're somewhere in your late 40s, 50s, or early 60s, and you've been wondering why work suddenly feels different than it did 10 or 20 years ago, I think you're going to recognize a lot of what I'm about to talk about. Now, obviously, too, know that I'm not speaking for every Gen Xer. Some people love their careers and want to keep working for a long time, and that's fine. But I think there's a sizable group of us who aren't necessarily miserable at work. We've just started questioning the trade, and that's different. Okay, here goes. The first reason goes all the way back to how a lot of us grew up. When Gen X was growing up, we learned to be pretty independent. I know this has almost become a cliche about our generation, but there really was something different about growing up before everybody was reachable every second of every day. A lot of us came home from school to an empty house. But we figured things out. We entertained ourselves. If we were bored, well, we were bored. Nobody immediately handed us a device with 400 million things to watch. We made up our own games and fun things to do, and we were outside all day. Our parents didn't necessarily know exactly where we were every minute. Sometimes I'm not even sure they knew which zip code I was in, but we survived and really thrived in a way that sadly I think today's kids won't experience. And I think that independence we had matters more in retirement than people realize. Before I retired, one of the things people sometimes worried about was what they would do all day without a job giving them somewhere to go and something to do. That hasn't been a problem for me. One thing I've learned in retirement is that I don't need someone else filling my calendar to give my day purpose. In fact, I've learned that I really like deciding for myself what deserves my time and what gives my life purpose. And I think a lot of Gen Xers are pretty comfortable with that because we're used to figuring things out. We're used to having some space. We're used to not having someone constantly directing us, which makes leaving the structure of work maybe a little less frightening than it first appears. But there's another part of this that's even bigger. We watch the deal with corporate America change. A lot of us grew up with some version of this message. Work hard, be loyal, build a career, do a good job. And if you take care of the company will take care of you. I don't think many Gen Xers still believe that, and I'm not saying that because I think companies are evil. It's just that companies make decisions that are right for the business. They told us they care about us, but the reality is we've learned that's not necessarily true, as the business is always going to take priority. They reorganize, they merge, they cut expenses, they eliminate positions, they change strategies, and they replace people. It's just business. And eventually, I, along with many of my fellow Gen Xers, as we progressed in our careers, realized something very simple. If a company has to make decisions that are right for the company, then I have to make decisions that are right for me. Now, that sounds obvious, but I don't think I fully internalized it when I was younger. Your employer is managing its interests. You need to manage yours. And once you see work that way, something changes. You can still be a good employee. You can still work hard. You can still care about doing a good job, but you stop confusing employment with loyalty for life. And I think that matters when you're deciding whether to work another 3 years, 5 or 10 years, simply because that's what you're supposedly supposed to do. Which brings me to number 3. I think a lot of Gen X is tired. But I don't necessarily mean burned out in the dramatic sense. I wasn't collapsing on my desk before I retired. I wasn't waking up every morning thinking, I absolutely cannot do this for one more day. It was subtler than that. It was cumulative. Think about 30 or more years of working, the thousands of mornings where somebody else owns most of your day, the deadlines, the meetings, performance reviews, reorganizations, and oh my gosh, all those emails, the commuting, the office politics, problems that suddenly become your emergency and often were not an emergency at all. New initiatives that everyone is really excited about for approximately 9 months until they're replaced by the next new initiative. And of course, all those pointless meetings that absolutely could have been just an email. One Tuesday for work isn't so bad, but after you've lived through several thousand Tuesdays, you start looking at them differently. And I think that's what happened to me. I simply valued my free time differently at 55 than I did at an earlier age. And that's an important distinction because sometimes people talk about early retirement as though you must hate your job to leave it. I don't think that's necessarily true at all. You can have a perfectly decent job and still decide you'd rather have ownership over your time. That's something retirement has really reinforced for me. You don't have to wait until work becomes unbearable before you're allowed to want something else. Number 4 is that Gen X is reaching a stage of life where we're getting reminders from every direction that time isn't unlimited. A lot of people our age are caught right in the middle. Kids may still need help even though they're technically adults. Parents are getting older. Some people are caring for parents while they're still supporting children. Careers are often at their most demanding right now when everything outside of work is demanding more too. And at the same time, we're starting to notice our own aging. I don't mean that in some doom and gloom way. I'm 57 now since retiring almost 2 years ago at 55, and I'm not sitting around waiting for the Grim Reaper to ring the doorbell. But at my age, I can honestly say I've become much more aware of time. At 30, I'll do that someday feels perfectly reasonable. Someday is enormous and feels far away. For many of us Gen Xers, we're at the age where someday starts getting more specific. We think about how many really healthy years we have. We think about other things like, how long are my parents going to be here? How many years before my kids have completely different lives of their own? How many big trips am I realistically going to want to take? And how many summers do I want to spend mostly sitting in an office? Those questions hit differently now. And I think that's one of the biggest things people misunderstand about early retirement. Yes, obviously you need the money to work. You need a plan. You need to understand your spending. You need healthcare figured out and you need to think about the risks. But eventually retirement stops being only a financial calculation. It becomes a time calculation too. And you realize you can't afford to look anymore at only one side of the equation. Number 5 is one I find kind of funny. As we get older, I think our tolerance for nonsense drops dramatically. Maybe that's a Gen X thing, maybe it's just an age thing, but it's probably both. When you're 25 or 35, you may tolerate it a lot because you're trying to get somewhere. You're building a career. You want the promotion. You want the raise. You want the bigger opportunity, so you play the game. And then one day you're 55 and you start asking a slightly uncomfortable question, where exactly am I still trying to get? another title, another promotion, another performance rating, another bonus. And here's something I started to realize. When you're younger, career advancement can buy you opportunity. But when you're approaching retirement, sometimes career advancement just buys you more career. More responsibility, more meetings, more people calling you, more insomnia, more stress, and more reasons somebody needs you at 7:30 in the morning. At some point, I started valuing control more than advancement. And I suspect a lot of Gen Xers still working feel the same way. That doesn't mean you suddenly stop caring about doing good work. It means the payoff you're looking for has changed. Which brings me to what I think is one of the biggest reasons Gen X can even have this conversation. For some of us, decades of saving and investing finally created the ability to say no. Now, not everybody is in this position. I want to be very clear about that. A lot of people our age still need to work, and some will need to work longer than they hoped. But for people who have been consistently saving, investing, reducing debt, building equity, contributing to retirement accounts, eventually something starts happening almost quietly in the background. Work starts moving from mandatory toward optional. And I think that transition is fascinating because it doesn't necessarily happen on the day you retire. You may reach that point before you actually decide to retire. That's one of the biggest things I've learned from going through this myself. Financial independence changes your relationship with work before it ends your relationship with work. When you absolutely need every paycheck, your employer has enormous leverage over your life. When you've built enough financial security that losing a job wouldn't destroy you, something changes. Maybe you stop chasing the promotion. Maybe you turn down something you don't want. Maybe you decide you don't need to work until 65. Maybe you go part-time. Maybe you change careers. Maybe you keep doing exactly what you're doing because you like it. But now it's a choice. And I think choice is one of the most underrated things money can buy. People tend to think financial independence is about being rich. I don't. I think it's about having options. The ability to say, I don't have to do this anymore, can be worth an enormous amount even if you decide to keep doing it. And then we get to number 7, which for me ties this entire thing together. At some point, time starts beating money. Not because money stops mattering. It absolutely matters. I would never tell somebody to recklessly walk away from a job without knowing whether their finances can support it. But after you reach a certain level of financial security, another dollar and another hour are not equally scarce. You can make another dollar. You cannot make more time. And I understand that in a way now that I didn't fully understand when I was working. When you're in accumulation mode for decades, saving more becomes almost automatic. More is better, more savings, more investments, more security. And there's nothing wrong with that. That mindset helped me to get to early retirement. But money isn't supposed to be only about the finish line. Money is supposed to help you build a life. And at some point, I had to ask myself what I was actually building all of this for. If the answer was freedom, then eventually I had to use the freedom. Otherwise, I'd spend my whole life accumulating the ability to control my time while continuing to give my time away. That's a strange, and as Spock would say, a really illogical deal when you really think about it. And I think this is where some of the discussion about Gen X quiet quitting or checking out completely misses what's happening. I don't think a lot of us are checking out. I think we're becoming much more selective about what we check into. Maybe we care less about status. Maybe we don't want every empty spot on the calendar filled. Maybe we don't need to be constantly reachable. Maybe we'd rather spend an afternoon doing something we actually enjoy than proving to somebody that we're still productive. That's not giving up on life. If anything, I think it's the opposite. It's finally deciding what you want your life to contain. And retirement has made that incredibly clear to me. My days still have structure. I still have plenty of things I want to accomplish. I still have responsibilities, goals, but the difference is that I have far more control over things that deserve my time, and I don't take that lightly. So when I see Gen Xers stepping back from the corporate grind, questioning whether they really want another promotion, talking about retiring early, or just deciding that work is going to occupy a smaller part of their lives, I don't automatically see people losing ambition. I see people changing the definition of success. When I was younger, success was much easier to measure: salary, title, career progress, savings, promotions. Those are all easy to measure. At 57, success looks a little different to me. Do I control most of my time? Do I get to spend it with people I care about? Can I do things while I'm still healthy enough to enjoy them? Do I have enough financial security that money isn't controlling every decision? And am I actually using the freedom I spent all those years building? Those questions matter more to me now. So maybe Gen X isn't quietly giving up on work. Maybe we've simply reached an age where we've worked long enough, lived enough, and, for some of us, saved enough to finally question whether giving more of our limited time to work is still the best trade available. And maybe being done with work doesn't mean you're done contributing, growing, learning, creating, or doing things that matter. It just means work doesn't automatically get first claim on your life anymore. For me, that's one of the biggest differences between how I thought about retirement while I was working and how I think about it now that I'm actually retired. I used to think retirement was mostly about reaching the point where I had enough money to stop working. Now I think it was really about reaching the point where I had enough freedom to decide how I wanted to spend my time. Before we go, I'd also like to invite you to enjoy joining my Patreon. You can join for free, and I have a lot of free tools for you to use. Things like my ACA Magi Estimator, Retirement Readiness Scorecard, Cash Runway Worksheet, 10 Ways to Lower Your ACA Premiums ebook, and more. And if you'd like to go a step further, consider joining as a Roadmap member. It's just $5 a month and gets you early access to new podcast episodes, all of my podcast episodes ad-free, and access to the private Roadmap member community discussion space where paid members can ask questions, share experiences, compare notes, and communicate with others, including me, who are thinking seriously about retirement or living it and learning from those of us that have retired. You can join my Patreon for free or become a Roadmap member by using the link in the description or show notes. And go to mikeupland.com for all of my media. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, take care and make the most of today.